Welcome to Procurious's Bravo podcast series, celebrating women in procurement. I'm Hugo Bridd, Content Director for Procurious, and I'm delighted to be a part of this series sponsored by Telstra, featuring inspirational stories and career tips from 5 women with some very valuable advice to share. I'm delighted to be joined today by Thomai Veginis. Thomai is the CPO of Telstra and as such holds one of the very top CPO roles in Australia, with an eye-watering total spend of 14 billion, a portfolio of 36 or so categories, and nearly 200 procurement and supply chain staff reporting through to her. Thomai, before we launch into your advice on how to get the most out of a procurement and supply chain career, could you please give us a brief rundown of your career to date?
Sure. So I started my career as a graduate in IBM Australia, and it was a great company to start with because it was global, and within about the first 7 years I found my way into a procurement role, an entry-level procurement role, and I really enjoyed that because I was able to learn very quickly from a very experienced global procurement team. So I think the grounding that it gave me and the lessons that I learnt in that job, because I did that role for quite a while, about 8 years in IBM, the learnings that I got from that job actually set me up very well for all the other roles that I've had subsequent to that. And so after IBM, I had 19 years in IBM all up, but then after that I went to National Australia Bank, and there I was able to set up and consolidate both the IT procurement and general procurement teams. Once again, it was different because it was an Australian company, not a global company, and so for the first time I was very close to very senior leaders. In being that Melbourne was the headquarters for NAB, and then shortly after that I went to Telstra. After about 4 years, I went to Telstra, and I'm still at Telstra. So I think Telstra is one of those companies that's huge, and I've been here for nearly 7 years, and I've done many, many different roles within the procurement function. So it's been, in and out of a few sales and technical sales and some project support roles as well. So I've had a varied career, but I've really enjoyed and spent a lot of my time in the procurement area.
Something that really stands out to me in your career history is that you haven't spent your entire life in procurement roles. So I guess I've got 2 questions here. Firstly, is moving in and out of the profession something that you'd recommend to others? And what transferable skills can you pick up outside procurement?
Look, I think, Hugo, I would absolutely recommend people look at and do, at least if you love doing a procurement role, I would highly recommend that you work in other areas within the organisations that you work for, because, some of the things that it's taught me is I have a lot of empathy for sales and delivery roles. And so when they're calling me, even as in my procurement function, they're often quite desperate and they need some help. And I think that, and I understand what that's like when you really need support from a function within your organisation that's not within your own. And so I'll prioritise and I'll work really closely with them. And a lot of the feedback I get is that that they enjoy working with me because I can see it from their point of view. And look, honestly, the commercial skills that you get in a procurement role are transferable everywhere. So, relationship roles, managing contracts, understanding the nuances of a deal and what makes a deal, that's the kind of stuff that you use in any role. And in particular, I've been in technical roles and project roles in the companies that I've worked for. I've been able to leverage my procurement skills in order to bring a different perspective and more value to other parts of the business. So, I think that anyone I speak to who's considering, a stint or a role outside of the procurement function, I would highly recommend. I think you become a better procurement person when you come back into the function.
That's fantastic. We recently published an interview with you on the Procurious blog where you recommended that 2 of the key attributes that procurement professionals should develop are firstly to get commercial and secondly to develop awareness, particularly when conducting negotiations. So can you tell us why these 2 traits are important?
Sure. So I find that often when we're in a negotiation and when we're managing a commercial outcome via a contract or via escalation or whatever the issue might be, we're so stuck in our own position that we're not really surveying the landscape and what's going on with the supplier or with our stakeholders. And so because we're so entrenched in our own belief and our opinion, we often then miss the opportunity to get the best outcome we can for both ourselves and, even sometimes where you get a mutually beneficial outcome. And I think that, and sometimes it makes us look like we're not quite prepared because we haven't considered all the angles and all the options and all the issues that arise with the requests or the demands that we're making in any negotiation. And often I find that the best way to get an outcome is to start with an initial ask and then progress that, not do a one big bang. Here is what I want, and then you've got nowhere to go. So having an awareness of the situation, i.e., how much power do I really have here? Is this supplier? What are the options for the supplier? What's going on in the marketplace broader than the relationship I have with this supplier? What do my stakeholders want? Where are we heading, et cetera? So having a really broad understanding of that, and that takes time. You really got to plan for that and think that through. It just limits your ability to really get the best outcome for your organisation. So I think that awareness is really crucial, but then being able to turn that into a commercial outcome, i.e., you understand what it means both at a high level and at a detail level. You understand what could trip you up. You understand what would be a bonus and what you're prepared to give up. All those things, all those commercial elements, I think, are really crucial. So it's not just following a process. It's not just running an RFP or completing a contract. It's actually being commercial and being able to translate what you're negotiating and what you're discussing into the true impact to the business owner and to their process or whatever outcome they're looking for. That then, the people in my team who can do that and do that really well, they're invaluable because they can step into any role, any category. It's the skill set that they have that allows them to be valuable both to myself and to the stakeholders.
That's great advice, particularly for anyone listening who might be interested in getting a role at Telstra. So what would be your key piece of advice for someone starting a new role in procurement or supply chain? So what's the one thing you'd recommend they prioritise in their first 30 days?
So, part of it is just knowing how understanding how procurement works. If you've done procurement before, really procurement tends to be, there's a lot of similarities and common ground across different companies and industries, but really get to know, the nuances of the company you're working for, get to know your team, and then really one of the first things I would do is reach out to the stakeholders, understand your category and who you're supporting and who are the major stakeholders, and reach out to them and find out what are their business plans, what's happening for them this year, what are their pain points, what's their supplier relationships are like. Getting to understand them and forming a strong relationship with your stakeholder, I think, is the best way to get, one, job satisfaction, but also it allows you to be more effective and focus on the things that really matter to them, not just the things that you might think are important. So there are a couple of initial pieces of advice that I'd give.
Thomai, you mentioned in your blog article with Procurious that leaders shouldn't be afraid to let their teams know that they are human too. So how can procurement professionals at every level find and maintain a sustainable work-life balance?
So I think this is one where we're all professional, and there's a level of professionalism that I expect of myself and of the people that work with me. But by the same token, in the office, you want to know that we make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We have many of us have lives outside of our work, which sometimes does interfere with our work. And being able to talk about those things and have a joke about the things that are happening and sharing, those things allows you to balance your needs as well as the needs of, your work needs. And, an example of that is when I returned back from maternity leave after having my second child. I returned into a CPO role for the country, for the IBM in Australia and New Zealand. And one of the first things I did is stand up in front of my group of my team and say, look, I've just come back. I've got two young children, and I plan to leave the office by 5 o'clock every day. And I think people were surprised maybe to hear that, but it was important for me so that people understood that this is how I was going to balance my life, especially with young children. And I thought I could do the role well, irrespective of how whether I was in the office after 5 or not. And then two, it also allowed them to see a human side of me, which people then connect with that and are able to bring themselves and talk about their own lives in the appropriate way. Like I said, it's not about telling them the ins and outs of every problem I have or everything that goes wrong or everything that goes right, but it's about setting a right balance where people know that I do have a life, I do have young children, and they're a priority to me as well. So that, I felt, allows people to work better with you. I think once they know what you're dealing with and what's going on for you, you form better relationships. The other part of it is also that people trust you more. Building trust amongst your team and building trust amongst your stakeholders is really key. So if you're being honest and if you're able to share information about yourself, I think that builds that level of trust that is really hard to develop otherwise.
There's some very valuable insights there. It looks like that's all we have time for. So, Thomai, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Hugo.
Thank you for listening to the Bravo podcast series sponsored by Telstra. This series will be made available in the Procurious Learning section.